Hey guys, Will from Nexus Performance. I'm here with David Grey. I'm going to get him to do a little bit of an intro about himself. If you look at it through your Instagram, people will kind of identify you as the foot guy, the foot specialist. Do a lot of work with gait and with athletes to do with the feet. So I guess you've been put in that bucket, but I'll let you describe what you actually do in terms of the whole picture.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Will. Always good to chat. The foot specialist, the foot guy, I've been told that I could get a hell of a lot of followers if I started to kind of market myself as that. If you want to be one particular guy, that seems to be a really good thing, but that's definitely not me, to be honest. People would say you're a foot expert or stuff like that, but I definitely don't want to ever be that guy, because what happens when you're trying to do something with someone's feet and it's nothing to do with their feet, you know? So I'm just someone who acknowledges that the feet are very important when it comes to the body. It doesn't matter where in the body you're working with, that you probably want to acknowledge or at least have a look at what the feet are doing. They're the things that are interacting with the floor, whether that's in a lift, whether that's walking, whether that's playing a sport, it doesn't matter. So unfortunately, in the rehab, pain, performance world, we have people that just look at the feet and nothing else, and then people who just look at the rest of the body and nothing else, which is a strange thing, I think. So why not just look at everything? And then someone that looks at the feet in any way, it seems to be a foot specialist, because no one knows anything about feet.
It's a very niched kind of thing, but you're right. I've actually fallen into that kind of, I guess, person before that's gone and somebody's told me that I had something with a flat feet or high arches, something like that before, and then I went and saw people and they gave me some insoles and things like that in the past before I knew a little bit more. And you're right that it was just literally, I remember walking in there and they kind of grab your foot and have a look and go like, oh, this doesn't fit the exact archetype of feet that I want to say is good. So we have to change you. And the funny thing is, like, looking back on it, that they didn't even ask who I was and what I did, and take into consideration that, you know, I'm 120 kilos, big guy that lifts heavy weight, which you would expect to change things. But yeah, looking back at that time, I didn't realize, but looking back at it, it kind of would have made way more sense to ask those questions and to look at the whole system. So it's a very interesting world that, like you said, that feet specialist world.
Yeah, I've seen people literally go into someone who's a specialist. I've been in a room with like doctors of physical therapy, doctors of physiotherapy, and I've seen them actually prescribe orthotics to someone based on them lying on a physio table and saying, oh, you have flat feet, without looking at them walking, without looking at them standing, without knowing an injury history. And it's just, it's insane. Like, it's like saying to someone you need a back brace based on looking at them lying on a table, you know? And to be honest, I would expect a powerlifter to have flatter feet, and maybe we can get into why I would expect that, but I would expect to see that on a powerlifter. Obviously we're generalizing there, but that's what I would expect to see.
Yeah, like I talk about with my clients, but also just online, trying to educate about compensations at the rib cage, at the pelvis, more axial stuff for powerlifters, because you're right, like most powerlifters fall into like this bucket of being of a similar shape once they get to a certain level. High level powerlifters, you just have to go to a high level powerlifting competition and look at them, and you'll see people that just are like me, that are just kind of like really wide, broad people that walk like penguins, you know, but they're really strong because they can't move, which sounds counterintuitive, but like we only need to hit depth in a squat, and we only need to pick something up off the ground and things like that. We don't really need to perform at a high level. You know, they're not going to turn around mid-competition and throw sprints at us. So it's it's a very, very, very specific sport where we only do 3 lifts to a 1 RM. So it would make sense that we get really, really good at that, which often drops off other areas of performance or health or whatever you want to look at. So we'll stick to that kind of generalization that we're going to have a flared, wide infrasternal angled, massive, like kind of compressed rib cage front to back. And then at the pelvis, we know that through the spine that the pelvis is going to kind of end up in a similar way. We're going to end up in that abducted, externally rotated kind of bias at the hip as well. And to me, as just kind of knowing how the body works as a system and as a unit, things working together, the feet have to have some sort of compensation down below. But I'm not the guy to ask, and I know that you are the guy to ask. So if you could just talk about those compensations here as much as you need to, and then we're going to see at the feet, because like I said, there are probably heaps more people in that, like me, that were a couple of years ago walking into an office getting their feet looked at for when they probably don't need to.
So what we obviously, and it's not, it's not just powerlifters. It tends to be, obviously, powerlifters and higher level powerlifters tend to be more towards the extreme. But if you look at anyone who tends to have spent a lot of time in the gym, they will have started to develop that shape of that kind of chest up, the ribs flared, because that's the most common cue you'll probably hear in the gym is chest up for everything.
And that's powerful position.
Exactly. And you're locked in there, and you can, obviously it helps with your sport, right? So what we'll tend to see is when the ribs come up, the pelvis will tip down. So if this is your rib cage here and that tips up, then the pelvis will do the exact opposite movement. That will tip down at the front. Now, if we are to follow the mechanics, so this isn't based on like opinion as to what should happen or anything like that. It's basically based on the shape of the bones, how bones interact with each other. So when the ribs come up, the pelvis tips down. And that happens in 3 planes of motion. The pelvis will always do the opposite thing to the rib cage in the sagittal plane, the frontal plane side to side, and the transverse plane. That's why we get that rotation through our pelvis and our rib cage when we walk. So then when the pelvis tips down at the front, typically what we would like to see is that the femurs, so the thighs, will internally rotate, and then the tibias, the shins will internally rotate, and the feet will flatten down. Okay, and that would be very normal gait mechanics if we follow it from the rib cage down to the foot. And we could reverse that too and flatten our feet. We'll feel the legs turn, kind of rotate in. We'll feel the pelvis tip forward and the ribs lift up. So we can do it from the top down or the bottom up, and we should get the same results. So if I see someone with a chest up, then I would actually like to see their feet being flat. Because that shows me that they're following the normal is a bad word, I guess, but normal, I'm going to say normal. Gait mechanics, even though normal doesn't exist, but the regular gait mechanics that we would like to see. And I know I'm talking about gait here, but gait is important no matter who you are, because our bones are shaped to allow us to walk, sprint, run, and throw. So what we'll see then is, I would like to see flat feet, but then sometimes we won't see flat feet. Sometimes we'll see the legs are turned out, they're externally rotated, and the feet have a nice strong arch in them. Now, actually, when I say nice is probably not a good word, because we can have a nice flat foot as well, or a nice strong arch. It doesn't, one isn't good or bad, one it's just is what it is. So if we have that feet turned, or the knees turned out, and more of an arch in the foot, it shows me tension. It shows me tension in the body, because it shows me that the feet are doing one thing from the bottom up, and the ribs are doing the opposite thing from the top down. So somewhere along the line, we're getting a lot of tension in hips or knees, or somewhere along that line. So it's an interesting conversation. There's no right or wrong necessarily, but you'll just see all kinds of people doing all kinds of things, and it's how their body has chosen to compensate.
Yeah, it's funny when you say normal. It's a hard, like you said, it's I've never seen anybody that's normal. As in, I've never seen. I've measured a lot of people's ribs and hip extension and rotation and stuff like that. And I've never seen anybody that's 100% perfect. And so that's to do with the population that I work with. We are so biased to one side, but it's funny how everybody's trying to get back to this imaginary normal thing. Like, and if they're lacking something, it's automatically thought of as a bad thing. It's like, oh, that's bad. You're not normal. And whereas, like we just discussed, we're never going to. It's normal to us, or what's optimal for us, or whatever isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's a good thing for what we want to achieve. So what you're saying is we want everything to just kind of work together. Like if you're wide here, you want to be flatter, and ideally in a perfect world, you'd want to be able to achieve all of the positions, but with everything working as a unit.
Exactly. Yeah. To be honest, you're saying that you haven't seen normal. I haven't seen it either. Not in any of the populations. Any athletes that I see, all of them have compensations for their sport, and it allows them to be better at their sport. What we want to see is hopefully that you specialize and you specialize and you specialize, and you get better and better at those things that you need to do. And there's an Irish guy called John Kiley who's pretty famous strength and conditioning coach, and he talks about the narrowing of the path. So here's your path, you specialize, and the path gets narrower and narrower. The problem is the times that you need to step outside of that path a little bit, and you haven't kept that path kind of nice and smooth around the edges, then that's when injury creeps up, because outside of those movements you have to do something, or maybe your squat doesn't go quite as well as it should have, and you have to deviate an inch to the side, and actually your body can't achieve that task anymore. So it's about how much can we specialize but still keep that path nice and smooth around the edges so that we can go there when we need. Because if we specialize way too much, at some stage we can't. Even the tasks that we've become amazing at specializing at, they become very difficult to achieve or to complete.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very common, like probably the most common thing I see in powerlifting, as in like an off-season issue that's done wrong. I've said this on other podcasts and stuff as well, is that just that I see people come out of a comp prep, very specific comp prep, hit, low bar squats, big competition arch bench presses, all to obviously like a 1 RM or heavy every week to get good for competition day. And then the next week after competition or whatever, these people are straight back into, it won't be like ones and stuff like that, but like 10s, but it'll still be a low bar squat, it'll still be a competition bench press, these same positions, hammering the same issues. They're gonna, because you're still hammering the same kind of passive structures in the body. Whereas, like you said, you kind of want to get off your path a little bit and just open up those areas just enough so that when you, it should be periodized a long time, I guess I'm saying. Is that when you don't need to be there, don't be there. There's other ways to get that job done. And then when you're in comp prep, specialize, get really good at that.
Exactly. And that's what the best athletes do. And they remember, in any sport, the best athletes remember that it's about playing the long game a little bit. And I don't love talking about longevity, because really as an athlete, and I've been there myself, you want to focus so much on your goal. And you kind of, you need to do that, but the very best athletes can do it. Like if you look at Cristiano Ronaldo, he's 35 years old playing soccer. He's hardly missed a game for 18 years. And he's kept himself in such good condition. Roger Federer is the same in tennis. And those are the guys who, they always look graceful when they're doing it. Now, obviously, they specialize very, very well, but they must keep their bodies in a certain condition that they're doing things that are outside their sport, that are not necessarily making them better at their sport, but allowing them to do their sport for longer and train harder when they need to as well.
And also just they're hitting those positions that they get in, when they hit that, when Roger hits a forehand or whatever, like like you were saying, the bones are in the right position so that it stresses the things that are meant to be stressed rather than stressing tendon, bone, joints, whatever like that. So hopefully the side effects, the inflammation or whatever is minimized. Obviously he's going to get some, but that's the difference in those top level players, I see. But getting back to the feet stuff, I just wanted to quickly, I don't know how deep your process goes, but we hear, and I put it out there, looking at the proximal structures, the axial skeleton, and then going down to the feet. Same thing in the arms. I'm not going to look at an elbow before I look at a shoulder, before I look at the rib cage. But the foot world tends to be a little bit differently. Some people like to look at the feet before they go up and they look at the hip. Do you ever go distal to proximal?
So I think a lot of it depends probably on someone's injury history. I'm very, very interested in where, because we can generalize and say that powerlifters will be in a certain position. And I know, like, obviously in the PRI world and that there's a lot of talk about the rib cage these days. But I still don't really love talking about patterns necessarily that everyone falls into.
Yeah, for sure.
Because how we've gotten ourselves there is all different. We've all led different lives. We've all picked up different injuries. We all have different thoughts and feelings and fears and emotions about our bodies, and things that we think are strong, things that we think are weak. So if someone's injury history is usually where I'd pay a hell of a lot of attention to first. And that could be someone's elbow, just looking very closely at someone's elbow. But obviously then that might lead me to a shoulder and a rib cage, and that's why the elbow is injured. So typically I will always see that the structure that is injured or in pain or struggling a little bit, that's probably the structure that's doing too much work. It's being overloaded for something else. I do really get a lot of success with powerlifters doing two things. One is doing some very similar things to what you do, and that's introducing some variability into the proximal structures like the rib cage, getting that rib cage to come back and down, and taking someone out of extension. And two is allowing them to get their body weight stacked over their foot in maybe like a split stance, but allowing their knee to come inside their big toe, and just loading the structures in the kind of the medial arch of the foot, allowing the foot to really flatten down, because everything is kind of knees out, screw the feet out, spread the floor, all these type of cues. And we're obviously just loading structures the same way over and over again. And that can lead to a lot of tension, because naturally, when we bend our knee should naturally travel towards the big toe. So we're all told that knees in is bad, knees out is good. But when we walk, when we bend our knee and our foot is on the floor, our knee should travel towards our big toe. So if every single time we're in the gym and we bend our knee and we push our knees out, we're obviously compensating, and that compensation is a good thing. But let's introduce some of the opposite movement, because I want you to experience both ends of the spectrum, so that if we can go to this end and this end, then our body has a better idea of where kind of neutral is. And that's what one of my mentors, Gary Ward, talks about a lot. We don't necessarily find neutral or the middle point by trying to stand in neutral or find a middle point. We find it by going to both ends of the spectrum, and then our brain says, actually, I've seen this, and this is the middle ground. And the middle ground is more of a nicer place to live your life in. It's easier to get to that end that you need to get to if you're a little bit closer to the middle. Not too far, because we need to get here, but maybe a little bit closer allows us to get here more often and for a little bit longer.
It definitely, forget that there's been so many variations that kind of theory that I've seen. The whole like pendulum, whatever you want to be in the middle. Yeah. That neutral. Exactly. That middle changes. So moving, what you said there about the screwing the feet into the ground, the knees out, push the ground apart, all that stuff. It goes, like you said, against I guess, gait mechanics, what you were saying before. And it's that's all the stuff that we hear in powerlifting. That's kind of like if I start saying like feet in powerlifting, what are the things that we hear in the powerlifting circles? It's that.
Yeah.
It's like only that. That's all we get. Is there any other? I guess you've already answered it with saying the opposite way, but my next question was going to be like, is there any drills that we can do to
well, I would just say one thing. I would just say one thing on that, Will, and it's probably not applicable necessarily to someone as experienced as yourself, but less experienced lifters. What I'll see is, and not just beginners, but intermediates and fairly decent lifters. A lot of the time, when they're screwing their feet or knees out or feet out, and they're told to grip the ground a lot, what you'll typically see with a lot of people is they're gripping the ground with their toes.
Okay.
And because they think this is what is gripping the ground and creating a strong arch. And you also hear the word tripod thrown around a lot. So that's the heel, the little toe and the big toe, or that, at least that's what people think the tripod is. The tripod is not the toes. The tripod is the ball of the toe, so the head of the metatarsal. So the ball of your little toe and the ball of the big toe. And what we'll see a lot of the time is someone screws their knees out and they're told to grip the ground, and they're actually gripping the ground with the actual big toe itself. And what that does is I wish I had my mechanical foot here with me, but what that does is it actually, when we grip, it pushes the ball of the big toe up off the floor.
Yes.
And that's not a stable base to lift from. That's an unsteady base, but people think that that's a good thing just because they're gripping the ground, but actually they're creating a very unstable base to lift from.
Yeah, I guess it's a cueing issue. Like it's tough to use language because like I can in my head I'm picturing myself trying to cue that to somebody, and it's like, how do you?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's much harder for someone to picture that than for me to say big toe, little toe, heel. Like everybody knows what those three things are and what they say. So is there a cue that you would prefer, or is it just kind of like teaching people and going like, no, this is what we should be feeling, and like more of an education thing?
Yeah, I think it's probably more of an education than a cue thing. Even if someone was to squat in your bare feet, which I think you do quite a bit.
Every time.
Yeah, so in shoes, it's very difficult to see. But if I ask someone to show me in their bare feet, you'll see that ball of the big toe is popped up off the ground because they're gripping the toe so much. So if you could put a coin, you could put a little band under the ball of the big toe.
Yeah.
And wrap it around a bench or whatever, and just have it pulling so that if they lose that would pull out. So it's just about creating that awareness.
I think I have seen Chris Duffin and a couple others do that, actually, with the band.
Yeah.
And I'll just throw my little bit in as well, is that with that question there, one thing I'll see a lot of powerlifters do, newer people, is that when they're not squatting, as in like a bilateral competition squat, so say like single leg work, like a split squat or other exercises where you're standing, I'll see people try to go like, well, I get knees down in a squat, so I'm going to do knees out in everything. And they'll go and they'll be like doing a split squat with this way off, and they'll end up on the outside of their foot with the inside hardly touching, and they'll try to replicate in everything, which is probably a better chance to do the opposite, like you said, to try and feel the inner arches, to try and feel the opposite almost. But I find that being done constantly, it's just a normal thing. It makes sense in theory at first. I'm going to try and get this strong, so I'm going to do that in everything. But it's a big picture thing.
No, I think you're right. In single leg work, it's a really, really nice opportunity to have the knee maybe tracking straight over the second toe. If you're allergic to the idea of the knee coming in, straight over the second toe is fine. There's not if you actually look at, or if you actually play around with some of the bones on the outside of your foot, they're not really designed to bear that much weight. You look at the ball of the big toe, it's a real big meaty guy. And that's, if you look at athletes jumping or sprinting, that's where they get their weight to. Yeah. So if we're doing single leg work, I really advise making sure that you're getting into that ball of the big toe, don't be afraid to play around with, if it's some lighter work, play around with getting your knee to just drop in. I'm not saying let your knee drop in and have a big valgus or your knees touch each other or anything like that. Just single leg, just allow your knee track towards your big toe. You're not going to die, and you'll be surprised. You might actually feel your glute kick in a little bit more, which might sound counterintuitive, but our glutes actually externally rotate us, which every single powerlifter knows. But where do they do that from? It's from an internally rotated position. Mm-hmm. So if we're already always externally rotated, then the glute is kind of always short. But if we allow the knee to travel in a little bit, the glute gets loaded a little bit as the knee travels in, and then the glute pulls us back out. So you may actually end up with more glute activation or strength or work or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. I agree 100%. It's definitely, people are probably like watching it, just trying to do it, and it can be a bit hard to feel if you're not in the right like positions overall, but I can guarantee that myself or yourself could get somebody on the floor and get them to feel that way, and 100% you'll get more glute. No doubt.
Yeah.
The last part that I wanted to hammer was just shoes. Like we mentioned earlier, insoles, and then the common wedge, heels. Do you have any thoughts on those, or is it more of an application, like use it when you need it type situation thing?
It's a tricky one. I would say,
it's a very broad question.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's look, if you have a pair of shoes that you're comfortable lifting in, don't change anything. They're your training shoe or your comp shoe or whatever. Absolutely go for it. I would encourage people to maybe train barefoot or in more minimalist shoes some of the time, at least, just to encourage some of that variability that we've been chatting about. I don't know, maybe you're the better man to ask on that, but maybe training in your bare feet makes when you put the shoes on a little bit easier, does it?
The common reasons would be behind the heel would be just for a lack of ankle mobility. People would use that as a kind of a way around it. Whereas my general advice, and I'm sure yours would be to actually like get the ankle, like do it. And then there's other things like it'll put you in more of that, like it'll make you put more pressure through the front of the foot, or so you can kind of bias how somebody manages their weight like that. And if you're a bit of a deeper thinker in that way, but my general advice is always just what you said. It's just like try both. See which one feels better. Do that. And go for it. I'll wear heels when I'm doing high bar or safety bar, off-season rep work, things like that. But I think I'll always be in flat, wider, standard kind of like low bar position for a variety of reasons. It's just a stronger position to me. But if I hammered that for 10 reps, it would probably my body wouldn't be a huge fan.
So then outside of the gym, I would say, you know what, for shoes, I'm a fan of more minimalist shoes, but not necessarily. I even see some people wearing minimalist shoes some of the time, and my eye is pretty good for it, but they actually walk worse when they're wearing some minimalist shoes. So it's very much about finding the right shoe for you and something that feels comfortable. I'm not a big fan of a big heel lift if we're walking around, just going for a walk walk on your dog or whatever. And what that's going to do is that it's actually going to, particularly for the pattern that we're talking about with powerlifters, it's going to push them forward more on the front of the foot, and that's going to lift the ribs even more. So front of the foot will be associated with like very much chest coming up, and as we come back on the heel, that will be associated with ribs allowing the ribs to drop down and the pelvis to tuck a little bit more. So I think if we're outside the gym as a powerlifter or anyone that lifts heavy, you probably want to spend some time with your ribs dropping down, as you've been kind of preaching a lot, with some nice long exhales and things like that. So I would say the same with the shoes. Don't necessarily wear a big heel lift. And apart from that, it's probably easier for you guys living over there in Australia spend some time bare feet, go for a walk on the beach.
More acceptable.
Put one foot in front of the other in a small little split stance, and bend your knee and allow your knee to come in towards your big toe, and go in and out for 10 reps or so. And you might be surprised. You'd be surprised at how many knees that come into me that are lifting in the gym and getting very, very cranky. And just by helping them pronate their feet a little bit better, the knee pain can go away very, very quickly, or at least can feel a lot better. So if you're dealing with cranky knees, cranky hips, just invite that knee to drop inside a little bit, load some of the tissues on kind of the medial foot. You'll start to feel some calf load, some hamstring load, because all them tissues are designed to pull the knee or to pull the foot out of a pronation. So how do we load tissues that are designed to pull something out of it? We put them in there, and then they have work to do. Yeah. So
Yes.
if we're always avoiding it, then we're avoiding tissue load.
Yeah. All makes sense. It's good stuff. Like the reason I reached out to you and got you to jump on with me here was just it's I guess so many clients coming to me and they go, my doctor told me this, my doctor told me that, and yeah, it's frustrating to have these generalizations thrown out. So I'm glad that we had this discussion on a big picture, kind of both ends of the spectrum. It's been really good. Is anything else to add? Any quick ones? All good. I think we covered things pretty heavily.
Yeah, I think we did pretty well. The only other thing I would say is I do like to encourage some kind of weightlifters that I work with, powerlifters that I work with, to play around with some isometric work in positions that kind of replicate the gait cycle, or some of the phases in the gait cycle. So even just bending your knee, getting your weight forward on the foot and taking one foot off the ground and spending some time there. Mm-hmm. I know I'm talking about the gait cycle a lot, but it's important. I think it's important for people to understand that this is embedded into our DNA. And so if we can nudge our body or our brain a little bit closer back towards some gait mechanics that are considered ideal, our body can feel so much better. Our brain just soaks it up. It absolutely loves it. And then you can go to the gym later on that day and hammer yourself a little bit harder. So I would say always thinking, how can I nudge myself back towards this, just even a millimeter? So then I promise you'll be able to go and train harder later on that day.
Yeah, and you won't have to activate your glutes as much.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Yeah, you'll be sweet. You'll be good. All right, we'll leave there. Really good chats. Is there any website, Instagram, people can reach out to you if they want to get their gait, I guess, analysed or looked at?
Yeah. Not just gait.
Not just gait.
Right.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Just Instagram. I'd say just David Grey Rehab is my name. I'm pretty busy, so I'm not pushing things or trying to market or anything like that. But if people are interested, they can come and have a look there. Send me a message or ask a question if you want.
Yeah. Instagram has a bunch of good content, so they can start there and see if they like what they see.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Alrighty, finish up.
All right, man.